Now let's talk about Splunk Search Processing Language. In typical Splunk deployments, you're going to have Splunk administrators, working with domain experts in order to get your data indexed into Splunk. Now, once that data is available in Splunk, how then do you get insights from the data? Maybe you are an expert at Linux logs, Windows logs. Maybe you are just an expert in specific applications that run some web app or maybe voice calls and things like that. This data is already available in Splunk. So in order to get insights here, we say maybe you want to do some kind of search on the data, you want to perform some kind of analysis on the data, generate visualizations and so on. You need some kind of language in order to do this. So in Splunk, we have what we call the Splunk Search Processing Language that you use in order to perform this kind of search, analysis, and visualizations on the data that has already been indexed into Splunk. Now, it is the same concept like SQL. SQL is very widely known. So if you have in my SQL database, for example, you are using a structured query language in order to get results from that database. So in Splunk, your data is available there. You are using Splunk Search Processing Language in order to do that. So we're going to go ahead here and just look at the components of Splunk SPL. We're going to see the syntax and command types of Splunk SPL, and then we're going to go ahead as well and look at a very simple demonstration. Note that SPL is a very, very wide range subject in Splunk. Actually, there is a search manual that has tons and tons of commands, and it's not like you can just download that and go through in a day or so. You actually learn SPL mostly with experience. So as you continuously grow in Splunk, you're going to have exposure to the different commands that you can use in order to get insights from your data. But here we're just going to try to highlight the command types, because knowing the command types can sometimes help you to write queries that are less resource intensive, which kind of helps your deployment. So let's go ahead and look at the components of SPL. Let's now discuss the components of the Splunk Search Processing Language. As we saw in the previous slide, we are starting here with the data that is already available in your index. So what you typically do is to apply search terms in order to retrieve data from the index. So the data is already ingested or indexed in Splunk, it's available there. These search terms are things that limit exactly what you want to get from your index. For example, I could have logs from a certain source and I say I only want to get failures. So I'm going to specify that only give me failures. Or maybe I only want events that have a specific username like James, for example, and that kind of thing. So you specify those using search terms. So basically you use keywords, you use phrases, you can use wildcards, you can use booleans, etc. in order to get data from your index. Now this is generally referred to as base searching. It's part of the Splunk Core Certified User exam, and we actually have it covered in our Udemy course that you can find in the description. Now, once the data is retrieved, this is now where SPL commands come in. So you apply SPL commands on the data that has been retrieved by the search terms. And then what do these commands do for you? The commands specify exactly what to do with the results retrieved. So if, for example, I wanted to calculate a new field, I could go and use the eval command and say, hey, calculate a new field for me. Or if I wanted to calculate some kind of statistics on my data, I can use the stats command in order to do that. So there are multiple commands that come into play here. And again, as I said, these commands are going to be available in Splunk's search manual. So you can calculate statistics, you can generate charts, you can evaluate new fields. There are a ton of things that you can do once the data is retrieved from your index. Now, what about functions? Functions are available for some commands. Not all commands have functions. Some commands do have functions, and these functions are available because they help define exactly how to perform a task required by the command. So for example, if I pull the data from the index and say I want to generate a statistics table using the stats command, then the function is going to tell me how to perform that task. So for example, I could say I want to get a statistics table that gives me a count of events by, say, maybe county, or maybe by city, or maybe by state. Then the count there is the function. Or maybe I can want to get the average of a specific field on the data, then I use the average function. Or maybe I wanted to get a standard deviation, I can use the standard deviation function. I wanted to get the minimum value, the maximum value, and so on. There are functions that are available to do things like that for your statistics table. And then you also have function arguments. Of course, when you have functions, you need to put in some inputs, and then it's going to generate outputs for you. So the arguments are what you put into the function in order to get outputs. You have, for example, the if function. You cannot just put if and then it does what you want. So of course, you have some function arguments that you have to put into the if function in order to give you results. And then the next thing is the command arguments themselves. So don't confuse function arguments with command arguments. Command arguments are actually what you apply at the command level. So these are variables that are needed for the command to work. So for example, you can decide that I want to limit the number of results that I generate. A good example here is the top command. So if you use the top command, you can use, for example, the limit argument in order to control the number of results that you want to generate. We're going to see examples like that. And then the next one is clauses. So you can use clauses in order to group or rename fields. If there is a field name in your result set that you think is not meaningful enough and you think you wanted to give a more meaningful name to that field, you can use the as clause in order to rename the field. Or sometimes you can generate statistics tables and decide that you want to group events by a specific field. Okay, I want to get the count of events, or I want to get an average, but I also want to see it for each state, or maybe for each county, or maybe for each city. That's a grouping. And when you are doing that kind of grouping, you can use a clause, and in this case, you use the by clause. Now, what about the search pipeline? A series of commands can be applied to data retrieved from the index. So when we say that we are applying a command, like we say in this case, it's not like we are limited to one command. So you can apply a command to the data that is retrieved. It gives you another set of intermediate results. And then you apply another command to it. It gives you another set of intermediate results, and so on and so forth. And when you have multiple commands that you are applying to data that is retrieved from your index, you have to separate these commands with a pipe character. And when you have these series of commands on the pipeline with the pipe separations and so on, this is what you actually call your search pipeline in Splunk. That's also a concept that is important for you to understand. So let's now look at the actual SPL syntax and how all those components that we just discussed come into play. So here, for example, is this one we are looking at. It is a search pipeline. So you have the first part of it here is where you are applying your search terms. So you are basically saying that, hey, go to the index that's out there, which is the main index. In this case, we said the main index is the default index in Splunk. So this data is available in the default index. It has a source type of events gen. Just go and retrieve all the data that is associated with that index and source type. So that is how you apply your search terms. I could just go there and say, hey, I put James in quotes. It's just gonna maybe pull data that is associated with that. It depends on whether you have a username called James in your data. Or you can use wildcards, you can use booleans and other things like that as we discussed. But the bottom line is this retrieves you data from your index. Now, after the data is retrieved, then it means that you have gotten your first set of intermediate results. So you have pulled data from the index, and that's available to you as the first set of intermediate results. Now, what do you want to do with it? We said that once the data is available, the first thing you want to do is to apply commands if you want to perform some kind of analysis on it. So in this case, for example, you are seeing that we are applying the eval command. And before the eval command, you see that I have a pipe character. So there is a pipe character, and then there is my eval command. Now, I'm trying to tell the eval command what I want to do. What I want to do in this case is that I want to calculate a new field called core result. And I want that field to take a value of success every time that another field called response code is 200, or it should have a value of failure if response code is different from 200. Now, in order to do that, I know that there is an if function in Splunk. So I'm going to use the if function in this case in association, with the eval command in order to perform this change here, which I'm just really calculating a new field called core result. So what will be the final thing here? So once I execute that, I have another set of intermediate results, but the only difference with the previous one now is that there is a new field called core result that has been added to my data. Now, do I end there? Do I say that I only apply one command and that's it? No. We said the search pipeline can be made up of multiple commands and different things that you do with the data, right? So now we have our second set of intermediate results. And what do we want to do? We want to generate a statistics table. So in this case, we want to generate a statistics table that counts the number of events and groups those number of events by core result. So we want to say that count and tell me how many events are considered as success and how many are considered as failure. And in this case, we are using the stats command because we want to generate a statistics table in association with the count function. So the count function of the stats command, we are using it in this case to generate a statistics table. And then at the end, it's going to give you your next set of intermediate results. So this set of intermediate results now is going to take what you had previously and generate a statistics table from there that provides you a count of events by call result. And then you can go ahead. In the next one here, we say, okay, you know what? This field that is called call result, we don't want it to be call result. We actually want it to be called final result. So what we can do is that we can use the rename command, in this case, in order to rename the call result field into the final result field. So you use the rename command, you say call result as final result, and then you get then your next set of intermediate results where the call result field no longer exists, but the final result is there because you have renamed that field from call result into final result. So that's how the search pipeline kind of works with the syntax of SPL. And where do our clauses actually come in? So when you look at it here, you have the by clause. So you can see that you use the by clause with the stats command in order to group by call result, because you are doing a statistics count, but you wanted to say, give me the count, but please let me see the count of events that are successes and those that are failures. And then the next one, you also use the as here in order to rename the call result into final result. Remember, we said that you can use clauses to group or rename fields. And then another thing here is our function arguments. So we've used two functions here. We've used the if function, and the if function is associated with the eval command in this case. And then we've also used the count function that's associated with the stats function, the stats command, sorry. But you can see that the count function takes no arguments. It's just count. If you look at the if function in the other side, you see that the if function is taking result code. So you have to pass in some arguments into the function for it to be able to do exactly what you want. So those are what we call function arguments. Okay, before we go ahead and do a demonstration, let's look at some of the important commands that are available with Splunk SPL. Now, an understanding of the different kinds of commands is very important. I give you my personal experience with Splunk. Before, I never knew about the different commands. I just knew, okay, I can go into the search manual, I can find this command, I can use it on the search pipeline. But then, if you don't understand the different kinds of commands, you don't know at what point to put which command. And so you end up writing searches that are going to be very resource intensive. It's going to slow down the environment because it's consuming way too many resources. But once you start having an understanding of the different types of commands and where they execute in particular, then you start having as well a good understanding of how you can write searches that are going to be less resource intensive. It's just the same thing as when you do basic search as well. You talk about wildcards, you talk about things like that, where to place wildcards and all those things. It's very important because when you have this knowledge, you can write searches that are going to execute fast because they don't consume a lot of resources in Splunk. So let's start here by looking at what we call streaming commands. Now, we just spoke about this SPL saying that you start by when your data is already retrieved from your index, and then you start applying commands to this data. So streaming commands are commands that are going to execute on each event that is returned by your search. So for example, if I just ran a basic search and say, give me failures, and it generated 10,000 events, if I run a streaming command, it's going to apply on each one of those 10,000 events. But now there are also different types of streaming commands. There's what you call distributable streaming commands, which we're going to see now, and then what we also call centralized streaming commands that we're going to look at next. So for distributable streaming commands, the order of events does not matter. So when you run this kind of commands, it doesn't matter that the events should be ordered in terms of, the time at which the event was generated and things like that. So the order does not really matter. And these commands run on the indexer, which improves processing time. This is something that is very, very important to understand. So when you are writing a search on your search pipeline, most of the time it is important to make sure that your distributable streaming commands come first before other commands, because they execute at the indexer. So this is going to really help you so that by the time your data is available on the search head, you have only what you want. So it's going to pull a smaller set of data, or maybe a data set that is already an intermediate set of results that is already optimized for what you have to do on the search head. And what are the command examples here? So distributable streaming commands, we just saw the eval command when we were discussing our search pipeline. You can use that to evaluate new fields. There's also a command such as the fields command. So with the fields command, you can go and say, okay, in the index, I want to pull results, but I only want to get the events should only have specific fields. So if each event in my data, for example, had 100 fields, I say, okay, give me the events, but I only want each of them to have 5 fields. I use the fields command to specify just those 5 fields. It's going to make it more effective for me, because if this data has to go through field extractions, then the extractions are only going to happen for those 5 fields. So it's actually really, really helps with processing. And then other examples are like the regex command. The other is the rename command. We used the rename before, we used it. It actually worked on the search head because we used it after a transforming command. But in reality, if you just want to rename a field that is available in your raw events, then the rename command is best for you to perform before you start doing other things like transforming commands and whatnot. Now, let's look at centralized streaming commands. With centralized streaming commands, the order of events matter. So that's the main difference with the distributable streaming command. It still executes on all the events retrieved, but the order is important. And these commands run on the search head. So basically, your events are found in the indexer. You are running your searches from the search head. So when we discuss Splunk components, this is what we saw. So when you go to the indexer, there are some commands that when you execute, they're going to run in the indexer, which are distributable streaming commands that we've just seen. And then there are others that run in the search head, which means that you must have retrieved the data from the indexer to the search head before the streaming commands can be performed. And so examples are like the head command. Now, if you want to do head, for example, it shows you the top 10 results by default. Or you can put an argument there and say, oh, I need head 20, for example, it's going to show you the top 20 results. If your results are not in order, the head command is not going to work. So that's why we say the order is important when we talk centralized streaming commands, and these again only execute on the search head. So if I had a centralized streaming command to perform and a distributable streaming command to perform, which one should I do first? I should do my distributable streaming commands first at the indexer because it's going to limit maybe what I get from there. If I use a fields command, for example, it reduces the number of fields that I have. When I pull that, then I do my centralized streaming commands on the search head. So you have examples like the head, the join, the stream start, the transaction command. Now, what are transforming commands? Transforming commands are commands that you can use in order to order search results into a statistics table. Now, as we said, when you run your initial search terms, it pulls you intermediate data from your index. And then if you apply transforming commands, these are just really events that have been pulled as your result. If you want to have these events in form of a statistics table that is going to have rows and columns, then you have to use a transforming command in order to do that. Then you get a statistics table. And generally, these transforming commands are going to run on the search head, which means that if you had a pipeline that was a mix of distributable streaming commands and transforming commands, you want to make sure the distributable streaming commands come first, if applicable, because there are some cases where you can't really apply them first, right? Based on what you want to do, just as we saw with the rename command before when we were discussing the pipeline. So if they can be applied first, you make sure you apply them first before you apply your transforming commands. And a very important thing here is that most of the time, when you are doing analysis in Splunk, you want to generate visualizations. You want to have charts and so on and so forth. How do you generate charts? You can't have charts without your data being in a statistics table, because that's what is going to tell you which one goes on the x-axis, which one goes on the y-axis, and things like that. So you use transforming commands to generate statistics tables that you can then have visualizations from them. So you have different inbuilt visualizations that come with Splunk out of the box. So when you install Splunk, you're going to have, you can have column charts, you can have line charts, you can have bar charts, pie charts, area charts. You also have advanced visualizations that come with them, and maps and those kind of things. And you can import visualizations as well. So those are very important. Now, what you see here is a column chart visualization that is generated with the state value on the horizontal axis. On the vertical axis, you have the count of calls by state. So this is an example that you can use to generate this visualization because you use a transforming command that transforms your data into a statistics table from which you can generate a visualization like this. Now, what are some of the examples of transforming commands? The key ones are the stats command, the time chart command, the chart command, the top, and the rare. So as you do your Splunk certifications, you're going to come across this type of commands. For example, in the Splunk Core Certified User exam, you are supposed to understand how the stats function works, how the stats command works, not the stats function, how the top command works, how the rare command works. So those are covered in our Splunk Core Certified User course that you can find in the description. And of course, the chart and the time chart commands. Those are transforming commands for visualizations. That is the first or the second module in our Splunk Core Certified Power User course, because those two as well, you are required to know them as part of the Splunk Core Certified Power User exam. So it's important to note that. So now that we've seen transforming commands, we've also, prior to that, we saw the streaming commands. Now let's look at other command types. You have generating commands, for example. These are commands that fetches information from your indexes without any transformation. So you invoke these commands using a pipe character at the beginning. Remember that when we saw the pipeline, we saw that, okay, you use search terms in order to retrieve data from your index, then you start applying commands to that. But then again, here we are trying to say that it fetches information. These commands are used to fetch information from indexes, but we never said that we are actually using a command to pull data from the indexes. We only mentioned search terms. That is because there is a command. So when you say, for example, that you are saying index equals the source type equals this, and maybe you specify some kind of search term like James that we've been mentioning, or say just give me failures and all that kind of stuff, you are actually using a search command at the beginning. So it's actually pipe search and then you put what you're putting there, but because it is implied, you don't see that. So we typically just say that use your search term. So the search command is implicit at the start of a search and does not need to be invoked. So you don't really need to explicitly specify the search command when you are pulling events from your index. So we're going to try to kind of highlight that during the demonstration just to make sure that we provide some clarity there. But this is also a question that sometimes in your exam, particularly the Splunk Core Certified User exam, you're going to have a question on this sometimes. Anyway, so let's look at some examples here. So we've just spoken of the search command. That's a generating command. You have the data model command that you can use, for data models. You have the input lookup command. So if you have lookups in Splunk and then you wanted to verify the contents of your lookup, you can use the input lookup command. And of course, we have the tstats command that you can use on your TS-IDX files in Splunk. So those are the different, some examples of generating commands that you can invoke, with the pipe character at the beginning. Now, what about orchestrating commands? These are commands that control some aspect of how a search is processed. So these commands, they don't really, they don't directly affect the final result of your search. They just control how some aspects is clear. So I'm going to just take one example here. There are 3 examples, by the way, that we've pointed here: lockup, the lookup command, and then loop. Now, the lookup command in itself is a distributable streaming command if we don't use local equals true. So if we use local equals true with a lookup command, then it now acts as an orchestrating command, and it's going to run on the search head rather than on the indexer. Because again, as we said, distributable streaming commands run on the indexer. So when you just say the lookup command, you specify your lookup file, which fields are being looked up, and what fields you want to output into your results. I mean, if you understand how the lookup command works, this command is covered in the Splunk Core Certified User course. Then it's going to execute at the indexer. But now when you use local equals true, you're asking it to execute on the search head. What does that mean? It just means that you are controlling some aspect of how a search is being processed. I've had an experience before where, if maybe some of you listening will probably know a little bit about distributed search, where you have a knowledge bundle that has to be replicated from your search head to your indexes, and that replication was not actually working. But I have a lookup file, because that lookup file is part of that bundle and is not being replicated to the indexer. When I run the lookup command, it's failing. But if I put local equals true, I force it to run on the search head, it actually works, because it's not going to need that, that bundle that we're just speaking about. That's just something from my experience. But again, as we said, it doesn't change anything. It just controls some aspect of it and just tells you that execute this on the search head rather than on the indexer. Now, the last one we're going to see here is what we call data processing commands. So this requires the entire data set before the command can run. So with these commands, there are some commands that most of the ones we've seen already, right? When you are still pulling your data, these commands can actually be running as your data is coming in. But with data processing commands, this is different. So you have to pull the entire data set before these commands can actually run. And it fits other command types as well. So when we are looking at some commands, it's not like we can just say one command only fits with a specific command type. We just saw that lookup fits as a distributable streaming command, but also as an orchestrating command. So that's the same case here with data processing command. So you have examples like the sort command, the event starts command, the map command. So you can consider those as data processing commands, but these commands can also fall into different command types as well.